Aðdraganda íslenska bankahrunsins.
The Icelandic government, believe it or not, have told us, they told me yesterday, they've no intention of honouring their obligations here.
Við erum að ákveða að við ætlum ekki að borga erlendar skuldir óreiðumanna.
The first call would be on the Icelandic compensation scheme, which, as far as I can see, hasn't got any money in it.
And as people will now know, we are taking legal action against the Icelandic authorities to recover the money lost to people who deposited in UK branches of its banks.
Það sem var náttúrulega verst var það að Bretarnir skyldu í gær beita ákvæðum í lögum sem þeir hafa til varnar gegn hryðjuverkastarfsemi. Þeir sem sagt litu þetta það alvarlegum augum að þeir þyrftu að grípa til slíkra ákvæða.
Now, we took that action. I don't apologise for it. I think it was the right thing to have to do in the circumstances. We also are worried about money that has been transferred out of London to Iceland a few days ago, and I think it's important to recognise that that is something that we're looking at as well. This is, as you say, a very unusual situation where a country has effectively defaulted.
You became Chancellor of the Exchequer in spring of 2007. When did you first become aware of the operations of the Icelandic banks here in the UK?
I think, like everybody else, I was generally aware of Icelandic banks. They've been here for some time. There's a lot of foreign banks in the UK, particularly within London. As for when did it first become a cause for concern, that wasn't until 2008, when Iceland itself was getting into problems and there was talk of the IMF being involved. So the Financial Services Authority, the principal regulator, it was watching the Icelandic banks because, as it was clear, the country was entering some quite severe economic difficulties. It was also clear to them that the banks were going to be caught up in this too.
The banks were in trouble. Did you sort of nuance these problems, or how did you see them?
I think what was concerning us is that although at that stage, in the early stage, I had no contact with ministers, I know that the Bank of England was talking to the Icelandic Central Bank, the FSA was talking to its counterparts, and there was just a mounting concern that things weren't right. And it's simply a quirk of the way the regulatory system then worked. They didn't have the sight of what was going on back in Reykjavik that we would have wanted, and that's one of the things that's got to change.
Now, Icesave, these accounts were opened up in autumn of 2006. At the time, the CEO of Landsbanki called them pure genius. But the FSA also thought that this was very brilliant. This was a very good way of solving the bank's financing. Shouldn't that have attracted some attention? That this was a bank from a tiny country where the bank sector was growing very fast. Shouldn't this have attracted something else than just admiration from the FSA?
I think the first thing that people should bear in mind is it would be a big mistake to think that the Icelandic regulators failed and everybody else was okay. Wherever you look in the world, there were failings. One of the things that you should always ask yourself is, if somebody is offering more interest than anybody else, how are they able to do it? And if the offer is being made from a bank that appears to be, to a large extent, a branch in London with a small base back in Iceland, you do have to ask yourself, well, how can they afford to do this? And it's not as though we don't have history here. There was a bank that collapsed in the 1990s, BCCI. It offered excellent rates, and it turned out there was a very good reason for it. They hadn't got the money either. So I think there are lessons to be learnt. And this is something that I hope would be picked up now, that if something seems too good to be true, perhaps it is too good to be true, and perhaps you should do something about it. Because if you'd stopped this at the start, then it would have saved, I suspect, a lot of pain for an awful lot of people.
Now, there was obviously sort of a growing concern all through the 2008, from the beginning of the year when we had the Northern Rock. Was the FSA at that time trying to force the Icelandic banks to downsize their balance sheets? Was that something that was of concern to them?
I think there have been discussions going on about the balance sheets, although I think that was being building up during the course of 2008 as concern grew about Iceland's own economy. Equally, concern grew about the banks that were based there, because basically, as you know, you had 3 banks based in Iceland whose balance sheets far exceeded that of Iceland itself, and that's always a difficult situation. Now, there are serious questions to be asked about at what stage should the regulators have said, right, that's enough. But it is quite a serious matter to eventually shut down a bank. And when we eventually got to a situation where we said you cannot carry on, you'll remember there was a great deal of concern for the feeling that Iceland was being picked on. But there comes a point where you really have to say to people, you can't carry on like this. Now, I'm afraid with the benefit of hindsight, perhaps that moment should have come a lot sooner than it did.
But you had some encounters with Icelandic politicians in 2008, I believe. Was there something previous to the meeting you had on the 2nd of September?
No, the first time that I was aware that Icelandic ministers wanted to speak to me was at the end of August, when I was told the Trade Minister was coming to London. And he wanted to see me, and equally the FSA was anxious that I should say to him that they were now asking the banks to do things and they weren't doing them, and I hoped to get his support. And normally if you speak minister to minister you'd get that sort of support. They came to see me on the 2nd of September, but it was a very unsatisfactory meeting.
Those who came, that was Björgvin Sigurðsson, who was Minister of Trade, Jón Sigurðsson, who was chairman of the Icelandic FSA, and 5 civil servants. Before we sort of get into exactly what was said, can you describe the atmosphere of the meeting?
Well, the meeting was friendly enough. I mean, I just was struck by the extraordinary number of people who'd come to the meeting. I mean, normally you don't come mob-handed, but there was a lot of people. And the minister said, well, he spoke for a comparatively short period of time. Most of the speaking was done by the officials and from the regulators. But it was cordial enough, except that they would not, or didn't seem to me to accept that, firstly, the situation was becoming extremely serious, and secondly, that the FSA was asking things of these banks that were not optional, that something had to be done to stop a collapse. Instead, we were told that the FSA was picking on them. Now, that's extraordinary, especially in the light of what actually happened. What was happening was assurances were being sought. They weren't getting, they were not being met. And, to be told that we were simply picking on them and that everything was absolutely fine, at the end of it, I mean, I just came to the view that they either didn't know what was going on themselves, or they were just not being upfront with us, which actually really made it very difficult for us, because if you don't have total trust between authorities, then, it is very difficult to deal with people.
So you actually felt that they thought the problem was the FSA, not the bank's own operations?
Oh no, I was left in no doubt that they said that the problem was the FSA, because the FSA didn't trust the bank. And from what I knew at that time, I would have thought, and it's extraordinary that the Icelandic authorities weren't fully aware of the problem, that this was a bank heading for the precipice. They ought to have known. And to be told that, and I expected there to be, an exchange, and they say them to sit down and say, yes, we need to sort this out. Why don't we get people to sit down and work out what needs to be done? But as I say, at the end of it, I was left with the feeling they either didn't know what was going on, which really was quite extraordinary, or they did, but they were not facing up to it and were not being, straightforward about it.
From the Alþingi Special Investigative Commission report, we know that you said something to the extent of, do you realize the grave problems you are facing? Did you actually think that these banks, one or more of them, were going to fail, and that they didn't realize that this could happen?
My worry was they were going to fail, and we would be stuck with having to look after many UK depositors who'd put an awful lot of money into this bank. Now, our policy was that we were going to protect UK depositors. We'd done that in Northern Rock. We implicitly did it across the piece. And I did not really want to have to find myself in a position where I was going to have to, in effect, bail out a bank that was a foreign bank, it's an Icelandic bank. And what I was wanting was cooperation. Now, if the authorities had said to us, look, our country is in a terrible position, we just don't have the money, but we will not take any more money out of these banks and we'll sit down and work it out with you, I think the whole atmosphere would be much, much better. I mean, look, it's not uncommon for countries to have different competing interests. We and the Americans had different interests from time to time, but we worked closely together and we trusted each other implicitly. So that even when there were difficulties, with some of the big American banks, they understood where we were coming from, we understood where they were coming from, and we couldn't always accommodate each other, but at least we knew each other well enough to say, okay, you look after your own interests, but let's see what we can do to try and avoid, a crisis becoming an absolute calamity. But this wasn't happening here. Throughout all my dealings, my problem was, after this meeting with the Trade Minister, I was bewildered as to whether the authorities knew or didn't know, and why were they not being straight with us. And then when I had my subsequent conversations with ministers, it was always, very difficult to get to the bottom of what exactly the position was. If they'd said, look, I'm sorry, the game is up, there's nothing we can do, then we could have dealt with it, and we would have saved some of the difficulties that arose, which would have been better for both sides, I think.
After this meeting, one of your officials, Clive Maxwell, he sent a memo to the Icelandic government, and where he said the Chancellor, was somewhat disappointed with the meeting, since he felt the Icelandic side did not appreciate the seriousness of the issue at hand. So the seriousness was this, that the banks could actually fail.
Yeah, and which indeed they did. And this was the problem. And I say, they either didn't know or they wouldn't tell. And that's not a satisfactory situation.
So you felt that the people you were talking to at this meeting, they were unenlightened about the situation, or they were trying to trick you?
Well, I don't know what exactly was going through their mind. I do know from experience in life that when someone talks at great length, it's sometimes because they don't really want to tell you what is going on. And the simple truth here was that these banks were in as much trouble as other banks. And it wasn't just an Icelandic problem, but what was different was that if they'd been up front and said, look, our country has run into huge trouble, we're going to have to go to the IMF, we just simply don't have the funds to pay you out, or at least not immediately, you'd have tried to sort it out. But my problem was that firstly there was either they didn't know or they weren't going to be level with us, and then of course the other problem we had is that we knew that there was money in the London branches which was being taken out of the country, and that was making our position worse and worse. And I had a duty to the British taxpayers, just as of course Icelandic ministers have a duty to Icelandic taxpayers.
From the SIC report, we also know that the people who came to meet you, politicians and the civil servants, they had actually been asked to go to this meeting at the behest of Landsbanki. Did you feel that they were pledging on behalf of this private bank?
No, that wasn't apparent to me. All they kept saying was, basically, there's nothing wrong. The FSA is being unreasonable. Given everything we knew, and we can read the newspapers, listen to the radio, watch the television as well as the next one. It didn't take a genius to work out that what we were being told didn't fit with the facts as we knew them. And that's why when they left the meeting, I was flabbergasted, really.
So you obviously had your doubts about what was going on with the Icelandic banks. What did you then try to do to protect the interest of the Icesave, the UK depositors?
Well, the problem we had is that when a bank goes under, then potentially everybody's got money and it loses out. And we wanted to avoid that, because at that time, I think if one group of savers had lost their money, like a domino, the effect it would spread round, and I wanted to avoid that at all costs. But what I could not have is a situation where the money that was supposed to be in the bank was being taken out of it, out of the country, because it meant every pound that went was another pound the British taxpayer would have to fork out. And that's why, reluctantly, we had to use legislation to freeze the money. that power has been there. It is unfortunate it happened to be brigaded with legislation introduced for another purpose, but it's basically there to protect Britain's economic interest if the circumstances justify it, and I felt they did, and I think events subsequently proved that.
At this meeting on the 2nd of September, what could have been done differently in the coming weeks if the Icelanders had been upfront with you, as you say?
Well, look, my guess is by that stage these banks were too far gone to have been saved. The problems were arising, for a year earlier, and they actually predate, the global meltdown, if you like. I think there were issues peculiar to these particular banks that didn't affect other banks, but of course, what was going on, in 2008, compounded the situation. I think so. I don't think anyone could say it would have saved them and they'd all carried on, trading and lived happily ever after. They wouldn't. What would have been done though is we wouldn't have had to use the powers we did. We could have sat down and said, look, we need to sort this out together. We'll guarantee the savers in the UK, you'll guarantee the savers in Iceland. We're going to have to sort out between us who pays for all this and when it is. But the problem we had is that when I spoke to the Prime Minister, I asked him to look at this personally because I felt that if, he would see the advantage of the two countries working together. But he pointed out the difficulties Iceland had. He was asking me whether or not this could be, the sum in question asked whether the FSA could be reduced. Well, that's for the regulators, it's not for ministers to agree. And equally, when I spoke to the then finance minister, I found it if he'd just said, look, we have a policy which says we're looking after the Icelandic savers, the rest of you look after yourselves. If he'd been straightforward about that and would say, well, actually, okay, I don't like it, but I know where I am. But it was very difficult to get a clear answer as to where exactly and what exactly the Icelandic government was doing, except that it was clear the Icelandic government was in deep trouble and that I suspect wouldn't have been able to do very much. But it was just very unfortunate that, we were not getting a complete picture. If you're in trouble, it's best to sit down and say, look, one reason or another, we're in trouble. It's not the only country in the world that had difficulties, although these particular banks, I think, had particular problems.
So this was your mindset when we come to the first few days of October, that you felt that there was a lack of trust on your behalf. And then Glitnir, the first bank to fail, on the Friday, October the 3rd. I believe that you talked to Geir Haarde, the Icelandic Prime Minister, and then your attention, according to the SIC report, was on Kaupthing. I believe that you mentioned that they were moving, well, first there was a talk of 600 million pounds, and then another number was 1.6 billion out of the country. The FSA wanted to close the bank that day already. That didn't happen, but the FSA closed for new deposits, so basically had in a way taken over the banks. Was this not enough then? That for both Landsbanki and Kaupthing, new deposits had been taken over and basically they couldn't operate? Well,
there's two things you do when a bank's in trouble. The first thing you do is say, right, no more deposits, so no one else can get into trouble. But that didn't alter the fact there was still many depositors who did have money in there. And what concerned us was that despite the fact the FSA had said, do not take any more money out of the country, it was being taken out of the country. And part of the reason of me speaking to the Prime Minister say, I want it back. And, he said he would see what he could do. But, what the FSA said, it never did come back. And this is where this is where the difficulties start. That we were in a situation that every pound that went out of this bank back to Iceland, we would have to make good. Now, with the best will in the world, no country is going to stand by and say, well, that's okay. We had to stop more money being taken out. But I think in relation to the FSA, it's the FSA in this country that decides whether you can carry on being a bank or not. It was the FSA, not us, that looked at this and said, the bank can't carry on. And our concern then was to stop any more money going out of the country, because it obviously had to be there to meet the depositors who were entitled to get their money out.
So on the 6th, which is a Monday, Kaupthing got 500 million euros loan from the Icelandic Central Bank. Do you know if the Icelandic Central Bank knew on that Monday that actually the FSA was taking over all new deposits coming into both Kaupthing and Landsbanki?
Well, I don't know what the Icelandic Central Bank knew. I mean, I do know that the Bank of England had spoken to the Icelandic Central Bank because, during the preceding period, we were concerned that nothing seemed to be happening in Iceland. And so it was natural that we asked the bank to go and speak to their counterparts, because sometimes banker to banker you can make some progress. But I can't believe that it wasn't abundantly plain to anyone responsible for regulating this bank that it wasn't in really a desperate strait. And remember, at that time, this was the week when the entire world's banking system virtually collapsed, so it would hardly be news to them. But given what is now known about this bank, it clearly had problems that were just mounting and mounting and mounting.
Now, the Landsbanki failed on Tuesday, and it was being closed then. But you still felt that you had to put a legislation with this horrible word terrorism on the bank on the 8th of October. Why was it necessary to put this legislation when actually already on the 3rd of October there were no new deposits taken?
Well, there's two things here. One is when a bank goes down, one of the options that we have is to transfer that bank to the Bank of England or to another bank. And it really depends on there being another bank willing to take it. Now, at that time, if you look at Landsbanki, for example, any bank looking at it would say, we're not taking this. It's not just the deposits you take, it's everything else that goes with it. But my real concern was the fact that, had we been right from the start working closely together and money was not being taken out of the country, and when people said it was coming back, because we were told that the money that had been taken out the previous week was coming back, well, it never did come back. And, if you look at it from my point of view and the British taxpayer's point of view, suppose I'd done nothing and another £1 billion had gone, then people would say, well, you let another £1 billion go out of the country, and that's another £1 billion that the British taxpayer, has to fork out. So, that's why we had to take the action. I mean, it's unfortunate that a piece of legislation happens to be in legislation that was there to deal with terrorism. It was just simply because it was, at the time it was legislated for us, which is several years ago now, it was attached to that piece of legislation. But, and I can understand, the feeling that generated in Iceland. Though that was a busy week, you may remember, that we had, whether it was Ireland, whether it was, our own banks, the American banks, just about every European country had to sort out their banks. We had to act quickly. But as I say, the real problem we had was that if from the start we'd sort of worked closely together, then, as I say, with other countries, of course we have their differences, and we respect the fact that it's a job of a government to look after its own people. That's what they do. But, if the atmosphere had been better, and that we'd been more confident that there was complete, transparency as to what was going on, and we could have accepted Iceland's position, because, right at the end we were saying to Iceland, for goodness sake, go to the IMF because you need help, otherwise, your whole country is going to be in dire straits.
Do you think there was a slight panic in what you did?
No, it was simply because, had we not had a situation the previous week where money had been taken out and we were promised it was coming back, but it didn't come back, and there was, the FSA it was them that were saying, look, there is money going out of this bank, so we had to do something about it.
And it was not enough just to close it. You had actually to make sure.
Well, you can stop people putting more money in. But remember, what I wanted to ensure for the stability of the UK banking system is that we didn't have a situation where any saver would go to their bank to find the doors locked. That's a recipe for disaster when that happens. You saw what happened with Northern Rock the year before when the people could get their money out. I mean, the money was there. It was, anyone who wanted it could get it out, but you still had long queues. You imagine if the doors are locked.
But you said on the morning of the 8th of October, Iceland, believe it or not, is not going to honor its obligations, something to that effect. Was that your feeling, that it wasn't only a question of Landsbanki, but it was actually a problem with the Icelandic government not being clear enough about what it wanted?
I had, in a conversation with the finance minister, I think it was the day before, a couple of days before, I had said, are you looking after the Icelandic depositors, but you're not looking after the foreign depositors? And I got the clear impression that's precisely what the position was. As I said, and I look back at our exchange, I kept pressing and I wasn't altogether clear. But, when I put that ambivalence together with the problem we had with the money going out of the country and going back to the meeting at the beginning of September when I clearly was not being told the position was, instead was being accused of unleashing an unruly dog on this bank, none of that helped. Nothing would have been better, even in a difficult situation like this, if you've got two governments saying everybody's got problems, let's work them out. Let's not have recourse to the law, we can avoid it. Then that would have been much better. But it was a very difficult situation, and then I had the business of discovering the telephone call between us was partially, not wholly, leaked, and that creates very, very bad feeling. That was
the telephone conversation you had with Árni Mathiesen, the Minister of Finance. You felt that was a dirty trick, that it was leaked?
In grown-up world, you don't do that, and then not tell us, because or else you can put it out. Why not put the whole thing out? Because it's easily enough to establish the whole conversation. The whole dealings were just very unfortunate, and they were. They just made things difficult. I contrast that with the subsequent Icelandic government, when it had the same difficulties to deal with, but I found that it's so much better to deal with people who said, look, here are our difficulties, these things we can do, these things we can't. But, it was just,
being clear about it.
It was clear, and you treat each other as grown-ups.
In the memoir that Árni Mathiesen, Minister of Finance, has published, he says that what you did was completely unexpected. The conversations he had on October 7th were only a game. Their actions, the UK actions against us, Iceland, was just the opposite of how you had been talking and behaving earlier. Do you?
Well, I find that puzzling because he must have known that we are concerned. It's even more puzzling because I met him at the IMF meetings a short time afterwards. We had a meeting with our officials there, and if he was aggrieved, he didn't say so.
You mentioned that there was something ambiguous about the Icelandic government. If they had been less ambiguous, more clear, would that have changed the situation? You felt you were in the dark.
It would. I mean, because if people, on the face of it, you've got an Icelandic government, you've got three banks which are not part of the Icelandic government, and that's the way you start. And if they'd said, look, we have three banks here, they're in varying degrees of difficulty, then you can have a discussion. I had frequent conversations with my opposite number in Ireland, where, as we know, the Irish banks, had varying degrees of difficulty. But, never at any time did we have a situation where, we may not have agreed with each other all the time, but, we certainly trusted each other and we could deal with each other.
The freezing order, or this freezing act, was in place until June 15th in 2009. Was it necessary to keep it that long?
Well, once it was imposed, we left it there until matters could be resolved, and there was a lot of discussions to be had, and of course, there's subsequent discussions as to how exactly the money that we have had to spend is going to be recovered. Of course, that's still not resolved.
There was a side saga to these days. There was a question of a Russian loan offered or not offered. That wasn't quite clear. Did this affect your view on what was happening in Iceland?
We have no direct knowledge of that. We can read the newspapers, we hear these things. We picked it up. But this, if I remember rightly, was at one stage was seen being instead of the IMF. And our view is the IMF, which is the international organisation designed to sort out problems like this, is where you'd be better to go. Although, naturally, any IMF help comes with strings attached in terms of sorting things out. But that then would have been no bad thing. But I don't have any direct knowledge of what the then Icelandic government was doing with any Russian money. I just don't know.
politicians, they were indicating that the banks would be supported by Iceland. But there was one exception. There was a TV interview with the governor of the Central Bank of Iceland, Davíð Oddsson, where he said Iceland isn't going to pay the bank's foreign debt. Did this affect your stance in any way?
Well, again, you see, we pick up TV interviews like everybody else does, and this confirmed my view that there was no question of the Icelandic government, looking after foreign investors, and that's why, in some ways, if the Icelandic ministers had said, "Look, I'm awfully sorry, we're not paying," well, you know where you are. You don't like it, but you know where you are. And naturally, I assumed, as you do, that the Icelandic governor wouldn't have said what he said without, the Icelandic government knowing about it, and if not agreeing with it. But it just basically, the problem we felt was that, we're not being told the whole story here, and I'm answerable to the House of Commons, to people in this country who would naturally say, in the light of everything you knew, what did you do? And if you said nothing, then, they would complain, I think.
There was a meeting in Brussels. There were some agreed guidelines. Did you feel that the Icelandic government had changed their idea along the way on Icesave, after sort of indicating and saying, even with a letter from ministers to Clive Maxwell, pointing out that they would actually pay? Well,
these discussions went on almost interminably, and we were anxious to reach a solution. I mean, it is the British government's view, the then British government, and I think the present British government's view, that we want to maintain good relations with Iceland for very obvious reasons. We would like to see Iceland in the European Union if that's what Iceland wants. But it's a two-way process, and we knew the difficulties that Iceland had, and other countries have gone through similar traumas like this. But it would just been much easier if we just been able to deal with this on a little bit franker level than was the case, and that would have been so much better.
The European deposit guarantee seems to have failed in respect to Icesave and to Iceland. What are the lessons that you would like to learn from that?
Well, firstly, for as long as Iceland is outside the EU, I think the same rules need to apply as if it were in the EU in relation to deposit protection. And indeed, this is a broad question for all European Union members. There needs to be common standards so you don't get shopping around and so on. But I think the critical thing is, never mind what you do when it goes wrong, is to try and stop it going wrong in the first place. And that is to make sure that the regulators have a greater insight as to what is going on. Certainly from our point of view, if you've got a bank that to all intents and purposes is a London bank that has an office in Reykjavik rather than an Icelandic bank where actually most of its activities are taking money in London, that's a highly unsatisfactory situation. It was still regulated in like an old-fashioned branch of a bank rather than the main centre of operations, or at least the larger deposits being here. So I think that it's the preventions, I think, the lessons that we need to learn, and that we need to know what is going on in each other's countries, and we need to be honest about it.
So there should be a deposit guarantee in each country, and it shouldn't be this cross-border thing.
Yeah, I think each country has to stand behind its own bank. But that we have to make sure these things are properly policed, and there's actually some money there. It's a bit like an insurance policy. It's worthless if you turn up and you say, "I want my money," and they say, "Sorry, we haven't got any."
Mr. Dalling, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.